The writer of the book of Hebrews tells us that Jesus has been counted worthy of more glory than even Moses, which is a big deal. In fact, if you read Hebrews chapter 3, verse 3, it tells us that Jesus has been counted worthy of more glory than Moses, as much more glory as the builder of a house has more honor than the house itself. You see, to say Jesus is worthy of more glory than Moses in a first century Jewish setting would be super controversial. It would be a very hot button thing to say because no one was more revered to the Jewish faith than Moses. He was the one who was there when the Red Sea parted. He was there when manna came down from heaven. Moses was the deliverer. Moses was the one who gave Israel the law. So he was highly revered. He was held in high esteem by the Jews. But here the writer of Hebrews is telling us that Jesus is better. He's greater. He's more worthy of glory than Moses. And in fact, if you take a look at the life of Moses, what we're going to find is that there are a lot of comparisons, types, and shadows that show us how he, in fact, was a type of Christ, but definitely Jesus is better. So let's take a look at the life of Moses here. What you want to see is that Moses began, and he was born during a time when baby boys were being killed just for being males. You see, many years after Joseph died, and when I say Joseph, I'm talking about the Joseph with the coat of many colors, who actually made a home for Israel. Joseph he was the second in command in Egypt, and he made a home for Israel there. There were 72 people when they first moved in. And over time, after Joseph died, a new king arose who didn't know Joseph, who didn't know the story of the Jewish people. And he began to be threatened by their growth because these 72 people over several generations came close to 1 million people or more. In fact, the book of Exodus chapter 1, verse 8 tells us, there arose a new king over Egypt who did not know Joseph. And he said to his people, behold, the people of Israel are too many and too mighty for us. Come, let us deal shrewdly with them, lest they multiply, and if war breaks out, they join our enemies and fight against us and escape from the land. You see, the Pharaoh here is believed to be Seti the first. And the problem he had is that he had Hittites to the north that threatened him. And he was worried about the Israelites that lived in his land teaming up with another nation, such as the Hittites, to come against him. So in order to kind of mute down their threat that they could be, he begins to put them under harsh labor. And he was hoping that this harsh labor, this enslavement, would reduce their population. This was a military problem that the Pharaoh was looking at. So this new Egyptian king set out to deal harshly with them, and he set taskmasters over them, and they began to oppress them and put them into forced labor. And on top of this Pharaoh begins to set out a command that every Hebrew male child is to be killed. Certainly an awful, awful time. And this is not the only time in history that Jewish people have been singled out and abused by entire governments. And it wasn't going to be the last either. Satan has always sought to destroy the Jewish people. You can trace that through history. Why? Knowing that Messiah would come from the nation of Israel, Satan probably mistakenly believed that if he could destroy the Jews, he could stop Messiah from coming. And you see this all throughout Scripture, that he thought that he could thwart God's plan of redemption. And Satan hates the Jewish people. And there's no other explanation for this that would make any sense to why we see so much anti-Semitism today. Satan wants to wipe out the Jewish people. This is God's chosen people, and we see this time and time again. Well, Moses was born during this time when the baby boys were being killed. And under these horrible conditions, God miraculously saves him from death as a baby. In Exodus chapter 2, we're told in verse 1, a man from the house of Levi went and took as his wife a Levite woman. The woman conceived and bore a son, and when she saw that he was a fine child, she hid him for 3 months. When she could hide him no longer, she took for him a basket made of bulrushes, daubed it with bitumen and pitch, and put the child in it and placed it among the reeds by the river bank. And as this baby is in this basket on the Nile River, which was a super dangerous place to be anyway, especially for a baby, in a basket that was made of bushes and tar and mud, the Pharaoh's daughter just so happened to come down to bathe at the river at that spot when she spotted the basket. She opened it, she saw the child was a Hebrew child, and she took pity on him. Now, here's the cool thing about God's providence in all of this. Moses' sister was watching this whole thing go down. She was keeping an eye on baby brother in the basket. And when she saw this happen, she comes and she talks to the Pharaoh's daughter and offers a Hebrew woman to be a wet nurse for this child that she's going to take to her own. And would you believe that the Pharaoh's daughter ends up hiring Moses' very own mother to nurse him, to be his, to nurse her own child? She's getting paid money. This is God's providence. And when Moses grew up, Moses' mother let him go to the Pharaoh's daughter. And in Exodus chapter 2, we see that the Pharaoh's daughter makes Moses her very own son. A baby placed in a basket in a dangerous river surely meant death. But in the providence of God, this situation, as bad as it was, as horrible as it was, God took like what was the worst possible situation, and he brought the very best outcome, the very answers to prayer. And the way God handles this situation shows that he is in total control of all things, that nothing slips through the cracks with God. Well, as Moses grows up, he begins to act as Israel's deliverer, but his actions were apart from the call and empowering of God, and the timing was off. Because in Exodus chapter 2, verse 11, we see that when Moses had grown up, he went out to his people and looked on their burdens, and he saw an Egyptian beating a Hebrew, one of his people. He looked this way and that, and seeing no one, he struck down the Egyptian and hid him in the sand. So Moses begins to act as Israel's deliverer, but in the wrong way and at the wrong time. Obviously, Moses is showing his heart for the Israelites. He's showing his heart for the Hebrew people, that he did not want to see them under such conditions. And he's trying to do his best to be who God has called him to be, but he's going about it all in the wrong way. You see, he lacked moral values and an understanding of a relationship with God, which God was going to remedy soon. And it took this to get Moses to that place where God could really speak to him. So Moses took off, and God spoke to him in a very unique way. He summoned him to deliver the children of Israel out of bondage. You see, when Moses left Egypt after killing a man, the man was found. Moses was to blame. And he ran and hid in a place called Midian for 40 years. But while in Midian, in his 40th year of watching sheep, he joins in with a whole other family. And in his 40th year of watching sheep in Midian, God calls out to Moses from a burning bush. And this is what God tells him. Exodus chapter 3, verse 10. Come, I will send you to Pharaoh, that you may bring my people, the children of Israel, out of Egypt. And of course, you've heard this story before. Moses at the burning bush, talking to God. And Moses says, who am I? Who am I that I should go and do this? And God responded, I'll be with you, Moses. And when you free these people, I want you to return to this very mountain and worship God. Well, Moses went to Egypt as God commanded, and God's miracles followed. See, now in the 40th year of his hiding, he learns to have a relationship with God. And now he's moving in the power of God at the right time and in the right way. He goes to Pharaoh, And he says, let my people go. And of course, you know this story as well. Pharaoh refuses. And each time there's a refusal, there is a plague that comes upon Egypt. And this happens 10 times. It's in the face of destruction that Moses' faith is standing firm because he's learned to make God his strength. God performed the miracle of plague after plague after plague that would affect the Egyptians, but not the Israelites. And soon after the 10th plague, which was the death of the firstborn, the Pharaoh finally agrees to let Moses and Israel go. But as they leave, Pharaoh changes his mind. And he chases them down, and they find themselves with their back to the Red Sea and an Egyptian army breathing down their necks. And then God does the incredible miracle of parting the Red Sea, where Israel crosses over, and as Pharaoh and his army are crossing through, the waters close back together. This is what I want you to see. As we look at the life of Moses and we compare it to the life of Jesus, this idea of a deliverer is prefigured in many ways. So the life of Moses was great, don't get me wrong, but in comparison, the life of Jesus is better, it's superior, it's greater. Because what Moses accomplished for Israel alone serves to shadow what Jesus would accomplish for the whole world. Both were born during a time when Jewish boys were being killed. Both were miraculously saved from death as a baby. Moses in the basket, Jesus to Egypt, which, there's the comparison there. Both were sent by God to deliver God's people from bondage. Moses, physical slavery bondage, Jesus, spiritual bondage to sin. Both brought about deliverance through supernatural means. Moses in the parting of the Red Sea, Jesus dying on the cross and rising from the dead to supernaturally bring you and I into the family of God. Those that repent, those that have faith in him and his work, are brought into the family of God, forgiven of sin. You see, Moses was great, and what he did was a shadow. He was the deliverer of God's people. Jesus was also deliverer of God's people, but the difference is what Moses did for Israel specifically, Jesus did for the entire world. Thank you for joining me today. I hope you'll come back next time.